at this time, I would love to welcome our panelists from the Community Economic Defense Project onto stage. Give it up for this awesome, dope crew.
Thank you.
Hello, 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 hello. Give it up for these guys. So we have worked together on many different fronts over the years. And to make it, I don't know, more difficult for landlords to evict tenants, to make it more difficult for predatory towing companies to tow folks' cars, and most recently to cap the cost of life-saving EpiPens. So this team has done some really incredible work. I'd like to welcome Cristina Garcia, CEDP's head of programs. Sam is CEDP's co-founder and president. Zach is the co-founder and CEO. And Melissa Mejia is the head of state and local policy. I think that the work that you all have done has been incredibly important and deeply needed, responding to and being born out of the crisis that was the pandemic. And so I would just like to thank you for the work that you have done. And I want to talk a little bit with you all about what's happening now and how you think about the work that you're engaged in as we emerge from this weird after-pandemic time. So I'm going to start out with a question for my constituent and homegirl, Melissa Mejia. As a Northsider, having been born and raised, we've seen, you can attest to this, I think in ways that are pretty profound. The ways that we have seen just dramatic transformation, gentrification, displacement, that has brought with it increased costs of living, increases in eviction. And so talk to me about, one, what you're seeing, and two, how we combat it. No pressure.
Easy question. Yeah, I feel like I talk about it all the time. Yeah, the North Side looks really, really different from the place I grew up in. I'm one of the only people that I know that I grew up with there that owns a house in that neighborhood. I might be the only one, and it's only because it's an affordable house. And so throughout my lifetime, we have seen, obviously, it is sort of a nationally recognized neighborhood in terms of the rate and speed of gentrification that happened. And I think it's mostly Latino community, and I think what gets lost a lot of the time, and like the quick conversation for people who are new to Denver, don't know the history, don't have any memories of what it used to be, is that it's not just the families and the multi-generational families and the people that had been there a long time, but it is the sense of community, it is the businesses, it is the small businesses and who they serve. And so as everybody has had to move and had to leave, largely going to surrounding suburbs, which is usually an indicator that people did not want to leave, they just didn't have a choice. The feeling of the neighborhood changes in a way where those of us who grew up there no longer feel like it is for us. And to the point where a lot of people don't feel welcome there. And I think a really interesting thing, I have a kid in high school who did a year at North, and while she was at North a couple years ago, 70% of that high school is still Latino, even though that is no longer the demographic of the neighborhood. And what that says is, one, that people still feel attached to that place. because it was a place for culture and community and history, political history, cultural history. And so they send their kids there. And then there's the other piece of it where all of the wealth that moved into that neighborhood, that changed the way that it looks, they don't send their kids to the local public school. And so what you get is a north that looks very similar to the North High School that I knew, even though the neighborhood is totally different. And so it's important to understand that with all of these trends of housing displacement of individual families, the evictions that we deal with on a daily basis, that what you are getting in the long run is complete displacement and disassembly of community, of support systems, of cultural history that Denver has done a lot of work to try and preserve, but that no longer exists in that place.
I want to thank you for naming that in the way that you have, because I feel like what the displacement that we've seen play out in the North Side was not one that was born by the pandemic, but one, as we've seen eviction accelerate and really transform over the course of the pandemic. The way that that CEDP was born and now is really client-focused and client-led in terms of working to represent folks who are navigating evictions, working to think about what are the other policies that we can do to address poverty, to stop evictions from taking place in the first place. You know, Christina, we often, you know, Matt in his book talks a lot about eviction being a cause and consequence of poverty. And you see this on a daily, being the head of programs and seeing what happens in the eviction courts in Denver and across the state on the regular basis. Can you just speak to what you're seeing in court, what your team is witnessing on the daily basis, and how it's playing out?
Thank you for that question, Senatora Gonzalez. I wasn't nervous until she said my name, and then my heart started like.
Girl, I'm nervous too. It's how this works.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight for such an important topic. And first, want to start by acknowledging the incredible CEDP team. They are the true experts of what we're seeing on the ground, just as many other service providers here. I mean, we have folks that are fielding calls day in and day out of people in crisis. We have people that are out in the community serving folks experiencing homelessness, trying to support them to get back into housing. We have folks that are scavenging all across Colorado for resources that are super limited and working to connect people to them. And our people that are day in and day out at the eviction courts, really working with people during a very difficult time. You all are the true heroes of this work, and so I'm just here elevating your voices today, so thank you. Okay, I feel better. All right, cool, let's do this. So I think that's an important question, and I also think an equally important question is what we're not seeing in court. And so the barriers that families must face to even access court are sometimes insurmountable. I mean, from the very basics of being able to access their mail, understand the documents that they receive, which are sent in English, by the way, to being able to get the day off of work, to arranging childcare, and coordinating transportation to courthouses sometimes 20 plus miles away. It's almost a miracle that folks even arrive. And when they do, most of them, the vast majority, do not have legal representation, let alone know how to navigate the court process. I mean, we're seeing landlords, attorneys coercing folks into signing stipulations that then minimizes the time that they have to fight the case. We are seeing that folks don't understand their rights and that they have the ability to file an answer if they even know how to file an answer. We're seeing court clerks not provide the translation and interpretation services that they have the right to receive. And after reviewing court dockets, we see that about half of them don't even show up to court. And as many of you all know, if they don't, they get entered into a default judgment, then setting off the chain of events that can completely destabilize their lives. Now, I know the impact of eviction firsthand. I myself was evicted, and it led me to experience homelessness for over 5 years straight, sleeping in doorways, stairwells, encampments, wherever I was lucky. I lost custody of my child, and, getting restabilized into housing was almost impossible with an eviction on my record. And having to suffer through all of the trauma that one does while trying to survive on the street, especially as a woman, and even worse as a woman of color. It's a miracle that I'm even sitting here today talking to you all. But I think the true tragedy of all of this is that evictions are preventable.
Yeah.
Right? With the right allocation and prioritization of resources, we can keep families housed and from suffering through the generational trauma that ensues.
I think that part of what is so powerful about the story of CEDP is the way in which, in the midst of crisis, starting and then building an organization rooted in initially evictions, but now spreading out to name and then tackle other exploitative systems, I think has been really powerful to witness and be a side part of. And Zach, I think in Matt Desmond's book, he speaks powerfully about how exploitation plays out in different ways, right? There's different flavors depending, not only in housing, but also in banking and also in workplaces and credit and other systems as well. As a co-founder of CEDP, as an attorney, you've seen the ways that eviction is but one of these systems. Can you tell a little bit about the origin story of CEDP, and then can you speak to some of the examples that you're seeing? I want you to also just specifically name the Wyatt's towing story, because that's a good one.
I may not be able to shut up. This is, once I get going on towing, sometimes I can't stop. We were fairly early in our work, I want to say. We were doing the legal work, we were doing the rental assistance, doing a lot of policy work at the Capitol. And this story kept coming upstream from our TAs who, as Christina was saying, do the unbelievable work of supporting our clients. We're hearing it from our lawyers as well. And the story goes something like this. I'm not able to pay my rent this month. Why not? I was towed. Who towed you? This company called Wyatt's Towing. Why did they tow you? I don't know. My car was dented. It wasn't well painted. I had a flat tire. They said my registration was out of date. Anyway, to get my car back, I had to pay $500, and now I can't pay my rent. So we hear the story once, okay. We start hearing it again and again and again. And so Melissa and I start looking into this. We go down to the Wyatt's impound lot. We do a lot of online research. And what we discover is Wyatt's is not one company. It's a collection of companies backed by a private equity fund that not only purchased most of the towing properties in the state, they also purchased the company that provides badging services for most apartment rental facilities in the state of Colorado, most mobile home parks, and they also own car dealerships, and they own an auction house for vehicles as well. And what this apparatus lets them do is decide who gets towed, when they get towed, under the law to hold on to their vehicle until such time as they've been paid, and if people can't pay, to sell that vehicle at auction. Of course, our clients need their cars to get to work. Our clients need their cars to take their kids to school. We live in a society, as everyone in this room knows, where a car is incredibly important to survive. So we get to work on this. We don't believe that a company should have the power over consumers in this way, and certainly the impact on our clients is tremendous. We're seeing evictions, we're seeing foreclosures because of this towing, and we work with Senator Gonzalez and other members of the legislature to pass a bill that changes towing laws, HB 1314, and we're enormously proud of this work, right? And I'd like to tell you that the story ended there, because what the bill said was, if you've been towed, no matter what, you can get your car back $60 or 15% of the bill, whichever is less. Job done, right? Mission accomplished. Just the other day, we had a client come in the door. She had gone down to Wyatt's with the form, with the money, with the paperwork, and Wyatt said, oh no, that's not a thing, but we will give you your car back if you apply for a Wyatt's loan, which is 12% interest a month, effective interest rate of about 280%, and unless you take out this loan, we're gonna keep your car. And so when we talk about absence of choice, which we heard a lot from Matt Desmond and Julie has alluded to and we're all talking about, and sorry, I get mad when I talk about this, you probably see it in my face. When we talk about absence of choice, that is what absence of choice looks like. It's someone coming and taking your property and saying, you cannot have this back until you pay me, even if it comes at the expense of your housing.
So Wyatt's is vertically integrated. I think like the way in which we're talking about the cleverness of these entities to find new ways to exploit working class people, to exploit poor people, is it's like playing whack-a-mole sometimes. To see it out in community is one thing, and then to see it, how it plays out in the Capitol is another. And Melissa, you and I are just coming off of a pretty brutal legislative session in which, you know, some of the things that we were really fighting for this session, some of the big and transformative policies, just cause eviction protections, land use, you know, an end to the prohibition on rent control, were not successful, among a whole host of other policies, right? And one would think that in the midst of a generational, the broadest majorities in a generation, that we would be able to, like, I don't know, do good things. We still got work to do. But I wanted to ask you specifically, Melissa, because you are doing the work to push back against all of these different forms of exploitation and systemic issues that your clients often are navigating. I want to focus in on something that voters here in the state of Colorado will have the opportunity to weigh in on this coming November, and that was the property tax fight. We saw, you know, we've been talking about, you know, the eviction crisis is happening. We're seeing numbers back to pre-pandemic, higher than pre-pandemic levels. And many legislators at the Capitol were like, And then folks started getting their property tax assessments, and folks started emailing their legislators, and with a quickness, in the waning days of the legislative session, folks were like, we have to do something. And we passed a bill in the final days of the legislative session. Within that fight, we were also able to fight for and ultimately win some support and protections for renters. Talk to us about what that looked like from your vantage point, doing policy on housing this legislative session.
Yeah, thank you. Really glad to have this question because I realized I only answered the first half of the first one. And these are very related, obviously. What do you actually do about displacement? What do you actually do about the fact that people who rent can't afford to live here? And how expensive that is to live that life when you have to move that often and the toll it takes on being so insecure. I think the problem is that it's a really complex answer, and what it actually requires to address that is systemic change. And so, to your point, I think this was a really interesting legislative session where there were some tenant protections passed, there were housing bills passed that did create more rights, that did create more access, and mostly that was to a system that still existed, remains largely unchanged. And the truly transformative bills were not received as warmly and died at different points in the session in different ways. And so I think the question about property taxes and how everyone responded to that is a really good example of when you have people making these decisions, people sitting in these places of power who get to dictate what the system looks like, who have no lived experience or tie or personal stake in these housing and specifically tenants' rights bills, they can understand some of the simpler things. They can understand a change to the process or a change to this right. And they can understand my property bill went up, or my property tax bill went up, everybody's is going up, this is unsustainable. But when you talk about a balance of power or how much a landlord is making off a property and whether that is justified and whether that right supersedes someone's right to a home and a safe or healthy home or a home in a place that's near their work or their kid's school, that gets completely lost. And so even the bills that passed that made those incremental changes were fought for, and it wasn't easy. And then we lost systemic changes that would really change how people who rent are able to live their lives. And that was in housing with something like Just Cause, but it was also gig worker protections. And it was also whether or not someone who is on the board of a metro district can then have investments that let them profit from the metro district debt that they sit on the board of. Like things like that actually hit how much corporate profit is being made from the systems, they don't pass. And so we had to fight, even in the property tax fight, we did get some renter benefit in there, but the first reaction was, well, if landlords are getting a discount on their property taxes, well, they'll just pass that on to the renter. And that was everyone here laughs, that was a genuine response when it was first broached that like maybe there should be something for renters in this property tax bill. And so we are fighting not only corporate money in lobbying, in control of the system, but also just a fundamental lack of understanding because of who is in the seat of power in this state. Yeah.
When Republican State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer was the person to bring forward the renter protection, rental assistance amendment on that property tax bill, and I found myself voting for a Barb Kirkmeyer amendment. My brain almost broke, but here we are. The House later put it in, and the bill is stronger for it. The last question, I want to kick it over to Sam, because we've been talking about what we see happening in court, what we're seeing happening out in community, what we're seeing play out at the legislature. And, Matt Desmond speaks pretty powerfully in his book about the way in which the pandemic response cut evictions in half. And I want to invite you, because of the work that you're doing, also as a co-founder and then on the programmatic side, I don't know, let's dream for a moment. You think there's a world in which we could end evictions altogether?
Thank you for the question, Senadora, and unequivocally, yes. This is a critical moment to be asking this question. We've seen evictions surge past pre-pandemic normals that were already too high. And, You've heard from Matt Desmond, from Christina, that evictions are violence and they're unnecessary. They happen when families have not enough money to pay the rent, and they disproportionately affect communities of color and are rooted in our history of racial segregation and racial capitalism in the United States. And we have the power to end this, and we saw it for the first time in big ways during the pandemic. We cut evictions in half. And we did that in 50 different ways in 50 different states across the country. And I want to share a little bit of the Colorado story, the way that I've seen it, because what worked here and what will work in Massachusetts or what will work in Texas are totally different. But we're also at a crossroads right now. With those eviction rates surging, we have a chance to choose. We can choose to go back to the pandemic normal where we were on a path to zero. And so to share a little bit about the Colorado story, we have a few ingredients here. The first is community. It's everybody in this room. It's everybody who came together to first try to pass an eviction moratorium. And I'll never forget crying on my floor the night that we lost the first time. And y'all never stopped organizing. And we were able nationally to get an eviction moratorium. We were able to get rental assistance. We were able to come together and pass tenants' rights bills here in Colorado that built on the momentum of losing. And we were also able to build systems, but that's community. That's the groups in this room. It's the housing groups. It's the legal aid groups. It's our clients. And we were really lucky to have a few other ingredients. We had state partners and city partners who were willing to try something new, who said, the nonprofits, y'all know the community, you can get the word out on this stuff. And they trusted a bunch of lawyers who had never distributed a check for rental assistance in our life to build a system. And that system responded. Brian Stevenson talks really powerfully about proximity. It's another ingredient. We listened, Zach, you heard the story from Zach, when our clients come in the door and there's 100 people in this room and watching online, listening every day and taking those stories and trying to say, okay, how do we respond? We had a client in 2020 who lost their home because the rental check didn't arrive on time. That's a solvable problem. We can get a check to somebody overnight. What we needed was some of the ingredients that large institutions in the private sector had, and we had other partners for that. Colorado Housing Foundation, or Colorado Housing Finance Authority, and the Colorado Health Foundation, which is alphabetically convenient, but we'll tie my tongue here. Both put in the seed capital that allowed us to grow and allowed us to build a system that could meet this need at scale. And Matt Desmond talks really powerfully in his book about the systems that work for most people in the middle incomes and the upper incomes, and we don't have those choices for lower income folks. And so when we think about the transition here, what is our challenge and our opportunity? Our challenge is to leverage some of those same tools to build systems that do work. Think about the towing story. Towing company got to we lost at the legislature. I don't know, why don't we just do a lending product and take people's property that way and make some profits on it? We can't win until we can figure out an alternative and a way of opting out of the banking system that works that way. And so at CEDP, part of the name change that you hear is broadening the conversation to that. And so, I'll close by an invitation for those afterwards to join that conversation as well. We don't have all the answers, but what we do know is that we need to build the right partnerships or from scratch to allow our clients to opt out of the banking system that will take $61 million a day, as Matt Desmond said, in overdraft fees from folks. We can do that. Folks in this room can do that. So thank you so much for being here. To the folks doing the work every single day, thank you to you most. Really, really appreciate it. And invite further conversation. And I'll pass it back to you, Senadora.
Thank you so much. Y'all, join me one more time in giving this amazing crew a round of applause.